Hello. First of all, I would like to congratulate Roberto on his 20 years in our relationship with Hogan. I can't tell you how much it means to us to have the number of people and organizations that he has helped by using Hogan and spreading the word and making the brand known here, and the personal relationship that we have with he and his wife. It's a very good partnership, and congratulations. Okay. I'm going to get started here. Are you doing them, Roberto? All right. So today I want to talk to you about, I've spent most of my career in talent development, leadership development, and learning. And I wanted to talk to you today happy to talk to you today about lots of things I've observed over those years and how hopefully when you leave here, maybe you can look at your own programs and make them a little bit better. Certainly, I don't have all the answers. These are observations. So today I want to talk about the talent development business. What does it look like out there? What are people doing? How I view that leadership itself and leadership development is broken, and maybe some of the things that we can do to make it just a little bit better. And then just a summary of that. So if you look worldwide, $366 billion is spent annually in leadership development. That's an enormous number. And the question, so where is money spent? We'll talk about that a little bit. So there's still a fair amount of instructor-led training that's going on. Executive coaching, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, has gotten very popular. And also the use, which I was glad to see, assessments in personality and also 360 assessments. So that billion-dollar industry, that's where the money goes. So how well is it working is the question I have. If you ask CEOs, they say that developing leaders is one of their greatest challenges. It's their top challenge. However, if you ask them how well it's working, only 10% think it has a clear impact on their business, the development that they're doing. Also, 11% say that 11% of the CEOs say that they don't believe they really have. 11% say they have strong leadership. So 89 say that they don't think they've got a great leadership bench, a great succession plan. If you ask HR leaders, they're a little bit more positive. They'll go up to 28% to say that they think there's qualified leadership within their organizations. But that's still not a very high percentage, is it? I mean, if you think about that. So what if you ask employees to evaluate their leaders? Then it gets really grim. So employees say 2/3 of the global workforce is alienated or disengaged, 65 to 75%. If you are a supervisor of employees, 2 out of 3 of you might be the worst part of their day. How does that make you feel? No, I mean, I don't think it's intentional, though. That's why we have development, right? So 65% of the US workforce say that the worst and most stressful part of their job is their boss, or their life, actually. But 100% of the workforce say that at some time in their life, they have had an insufferable boss. So it's clearly a problem, right? So CEOs are working on it. It's a very big concern, but they're not seeing that they've got a long, strong bench, that great leadership within their own organizations. You ask employees who really probably know better than the CEOs because they're experiencing it. You ask employees, 2/3 of them say, don't have great leaders in my organization. So what shall we do? Well, I always like to begin things with the end in mind. So are you even defining leadership correctly? So you're doing a lot of development with different leaders throughout your organization, managers, but what are you developing them to do? Have you thought about what it is you actually want your leader in your organization to do? So we have a definition of leadership at Hogan, but that we feel flies in the face of the traditional definition of leadership. So if we just take the traditional view, they'll say the definition of a leader is the person in charge. We say a definition of a leader is a person who can build teams or people who build teams. The goal of the leader is get to the top of the organization in a traditional definition. The goal of the leader in Hogan's definition is someone that will build productive teams. Help your team to perform. Got too many P's in there. Help your team perform. Key attributes of a leader: traditional view, charisma, and competence. Right? The charismatic leader is all over the place these days. But in our role, in our world, the key attributes really are humility and competence. If you look at focus, the traditional view, it says it's on the self. How do I get up there? How do I become the CEO? How do I become the manager of an important business unit? But the focus really should be, you're going to have to go. Wait. The focus really should be on the team, right? It shouldn't be about the individual's promotion and climb up the ladder. It should be, once again, how is the team developing? How are they contributing to the organization? And in the traditional view, they think good leadership is normative. Yeah, we do all right. In our view, we think it's the exception. We don't think you find good leadership everywhere you go. So how do we define leadership? Leadership is really, for us, evaluated in the terms of the performance of the team, not in the leadership status. It's more about the leader providing a resource for the group, supporting the group, training the group, helping the group accomplish the goals, rather than a source of privilege for the leader. And good leaders build effective teams, and as you might guess, bad leaders destroy them and destroy companies. So I'm going to talk a little bit about selecting leaders, and what I'm focusing on are leaders that are already in your organization that have been selected into high potential programs, although I do believe in selecting leaders before they get into your organization that are good. We'll talk about that some too. So if the selection process is well, I think it may be broken and maybe it's not very well developed to begin with. Only 56% of companies have a formal selection process. And within that process, many of them don't have best practices to identify the candidates. They're standard, or they don't use a standard selection or even selection criteria. And then I don't know that there's oftentimes a problem with resource allocation in order to support that. Let's talk a little bit about how most of the selection is done. And so 56% say they don't have a formal process. 74% use a process of selecting an individual through nomination. So the leadership of the organization is picking out those leaders that are going to be developed that are the high potential. But they're not selecting them based on anything. Well, they may be selecting them based on what they perceive as good performance, but they also probably did their performance reviews, right? So they're not selecting them through any kind of assessment method. They're nominating them. And oftentimes, the candidates that get nominated are the ones that have emerged. And I want to talk a little bit about the difference between emergence and effectiveness. Oh, that won't help. Sorry. So if you talk about an emergent leader, it is the leader that, and you all know them, you all have colleagues that spend their time networking. They're checking with so-and-so to see how things are going in their part of the world and their part of the organization. They're calling their boss, telling them what a great job they're doing. They manage up. They also are very good. They're a politician. They're very good at self-promotion. And you will also see, as a result of that work, they get rapid promotions. They do move up the ladder. But an effective leader is one who spends their time with the team, helps them, supports them. It manages the team. They're often humble, and they're promoting the team, but not themselves. And then, unfortunately, that often can be the individual that's overlooked. I want to tell you just quickly a study that was done by a gentleman by the name of Fred Luthans. In fact, he wrote an entire book on it called Real Managers. He had spent 2 or 3 years doing a study of 257 organizations, and of leaders in organizations. The research was he literally followed them around, he and his people that helped him with it, and wrote down what those people did all day long. And at the end of that, he sorted through all of the information. And he really did come up with 2 groups. And the overlap of what they did was very small. It was like 10%. But there was a group of leaders that spent all of their time, as I talked about, working with their teams, coaching their teams, actually performing the business of the business. And then there was another group that spent all their time managing up, which these terms are from him, the emerging leader and the effective leader. And so that, I mean, like I said, I know you can recognize those individuals within your own organization. So if we don't use a nominating process, if we use a nominating process and we select all the candidates that are emerging, do you think that probably goes back to the beginning slides where we see very little bit in terms of effective leaders, right? But some things you can do for selecting and doing a better job of selecting leaders in your high potential programs is make sure that you have a standard selection process. Make sure that you use the same tools to evaluate all the candidates. Also, it's very important that you select candidates rather than just having them nominated by the upper tier of the organization. Use a scientific validated assessments. It'll give you more objective information. Focus, now this one I think is probably rarely done, but should be done all the time. Focus on the candidate's team performance. How is their team performing? I'm guessing even if there are standard processes in place, people don't very seldom look at the team's performance to see if someone's effective or not. And then once again, focus on the effective rather than the emerging candidate. So if I talk a little bit about the focus of a leadership program, like I started out by saying, you want to begin your program with the end in mind. But if you look at the way most programs focus, you'll see that they look at fads, current trends, all of these up here. I'm sure most of you have seen. You've got grit, you've got strengths, you've got strength finder. And companies like to focus on fads. They like to pick these fads up. The issue it causes is that typically there's nothing scientific behind it. There's not anything that really helps you. But companies like it because it makes them look like they're on the leading edge when they're putting a program together. So this is another one that people are going to groan when I say this. Sometimes almost all leadership development programs are focused on and designed around competency models. The issue it causes, and this probably will never stop people from doing competency models, but the issue it causes is that those competency models are often developed by executives that might actually come into an organization and leave an organization, so they're arbitrary. The competencies, not the leaders, the competencies are arbitrary and frequently changing, developed by the current executives, and it's also kind of one size fits all. You hear the old, everybody needs to be a good communicator. Well, first of all, that's such a big bucket. What does it mean? Can you write a good email? Can you come up here and do a presentation? So, and bottom line, really, and those of you who are, familiar with Hogan, is that they're just unscientific. Our assessments, our work is all based on science and data, but most competencies are not. And then the third thing that I find that many programs struggle with is, what are you measuring? What are you focusing on? How do you know if your program's working? First of all, it might be broken up front, right? And then you're measuring. But coming up through the ranks, we always had what we called a smile sheet, and we asked people, was the room temperature good? How was the lunch? We called it a smile sheet for a reason, right? But we ask them if they like the experience. Another measure sometimes is, did you get promoted? Well, does that make it a successful program? And also, is your supervisor evaluating you more positively because you've gone through a leadership program? Somebody described an instructor-led program that they went to, and they said, you go there and you get a big fat notebook, and they give it to you, and they say, now when you go home, behave better. And I thought, yeah, that's broken, right? So anyway, so these are the measures that are sometimes put in place, but you're not really measuring any performance with those. So what does a focused leadership program look like? Well, first of all, ignore the trends and forget the fads, because they're not ever going to help you. You might sound trendy, you might look like you're on the leading edge, but I assure you, it's not going to actually help in the development of your leaders. So use assessments that are based on, Roberto, sorry, he says, that are based on sound psychometrics, that are professionally well regarded, that support diversity in leadership, that focus on important leadership behaviors, and those are trust, competence, vision, and et cetera. There's definitely a long list. So I'm promoting that you don't use assessments that measure competencies. And why do I say that? Oftentimes, first of all, my big one is that they're a big bucket, and you can't get down to specific behaviors when you have a competency as big as, let's say, communication. And they also have a tendency to be like, okay, you don't have good communication skills, so it's a good or bad thing. It's presence, or you have communication skills, you don't have them. High scores are always better, right? And oftentimes, because of the judgment, you miss the action, that actually the behaviors and the actions you can take to improve your behavior. But if you use leadership assessments that focus on behavior, what you will get is you'll get more context, you'll get specific behaviors, you'll get better discussions, how you do, how you manage, how you approach a task. Let me give you an example that might make this a little bit clearer. So in Hogan, we have a scale called the adjustment scale. If it were a competency, it would probably be called self-confidence. So you get a score back on one that's not a behavior. You get a competency assessment. It says you don't have any self-confidence. Well, what do you do with that? So if you use an assessment such as Hogan's and you have that adjustment scale, you get more information. Low scores are not necessarily better than high scores. There's good and bad news at both ends. So if you get a low adjustment score, what you find is someone that's hardworking, that'll listen to feedback because they're really motivated to get better. But you have someone with a high adjustment score, the good news is they'll seem really confident and they'll do lots of good things, but they don't always listen to feedback. So if you're using a behavior assessment, you get a lot more context. You actually get specific behaviors that you can work on and actions you can take to change to be a better leader. So just suggestions. So use specific measures. How do you know if your leadership program is working? So I think it's better to see that you have one and measure actionable goals. Are they able to set actionable goals when they're done with the program? Do they accomplish them rather than asking them how lunch was or the temperature of the room? And this is another one, and I keep hammering on this because I don't think very many organizations evaluate teams and how they perform. But this one is, does the team effectiveness improve? Because that's a sign of a better leader, right? If their team is working better. And then also another one, of course, another assessment to use, it would be a 360. So using specific measures, using a behavior-based assessment versus competency assessment. Those are two things that you can help fix the focus of your program. And then how we develop leaders is broken. A lot of things broken today, sorry folks. But we have a tendency, I know many of you in this room, and I've listened to lots of professionals that are doing assessments these days and working with the executive staffs and working with high potential programs, and the amount of information that they gather and present or are required and asked to present is enormous. But oftentimes once we identify the leaders, we know from all of that information that they differ in very important ways, right? We've used assessments, we've got all of this material. And then we turn around and say, okay, here's the curriculum. We're going to teach you financial, we're going to teach you how to have better interpersonal skills, and then we do a standard curriculum. Why do we do that? You've done all the hard work up front, you have all of that, And then oftentimes it's the one size fits all. Ends up that one size doesn't fit anything. But then we have a standard curriculum. It's got functional skills. You need to be able to read a financial sheet, right? We test your cognitive thinking. You have to have some reasoning and decision making. You need to know how to organize and prioritize and delegate. So we've got this image of I guess the perfect leader, right? They can do everything. Got to have the soft skills. But if you're going to do the effective development, what you really need to do is get rid of that standard curriculum. Now, you're going to have pushback from executives that have asked you to do it a certain way, but what you can do to appease some of that is maybe take 2 or 3 standard areas, programs that people can improve on, but then go back and work on those specific individual programs and the goals that those individuals have, that were the differences, right? The individual differences, if you don't do that work up front, and then you slide all these people into a standard program, you're going to spend a lot of time, a lot of money, you're going to get to the end of the day, and you're going to go, well, I don't understand why things didn't change. So it is a lot of work up front, but most of the time, and I think a lot of organizations are doing all that work to identify the individual needs, and so base your development programs on that. Well, then you get this far. You've got your individuals that you're developing, you've got your curriculum, you know what you want to do, you know what you're going to measure, and then here comes the organization. So most of you that if you're working in development or even if you work in an organization know that lots of times there are lots of barriers to programs, even if they're business programs and not necessarily more of your training, your learning and development programs. But they start out big, we want all of this done, and then you come to them and say, here's our plan, and they say, oh, we don't have any money to do that this year. Could you cut it in half? Well, maybe we can do half. The other thing is that you lay everything out and they say, yes, let's go do it. And then you say, well, I need these 5 people for 6 hours this month. No, I can't give you them 6 hours. Are you crazy? So we set up our own barriers, and well, we don't set them up, but we encounter our barriers. And I was talking with someone, and I think, well, actually just this morning, I think she's in the room. We won't name names. But I think in a really effective way, because lots of times we do struggle with this in the organization, it's the same people asking us to help our leaders be better that come and put up the barriers or get in the way of the development. And that is that I think up front they need to know the things that you take for granted. They need to know there's going to be some time, and if you can estimate how much time there can be in there. Also, if they just push back and you can't get any momentum, maybe you can find 1 or 2 things you could do to show a success. Because I think that speaks a lot louder to people that you report to if you can show that you've done this one thing and it worked. So now they've got something they can touch and see and feel. But other things that might be barriers in your organization is maybe feedback is not used very often. It's not a common thing. Well, if you're in learning development mode, feedback is a key tool, isn't it? So those are the things that happen. Let's see, the other thing is the ambivalence I have up there. People get tired of learning and development programs, don't they? I've been in this, or that where you went away for a week and you get your notebook. I've been in this, here we go again, right? Well, last year it was how to adapt to change. This year it's going to be, the agile leader. And the people that are even in the programs become a little skeptical, cynical. Cynical might be better. So anyway, change at this level with the leaders, as you saw at the opening slides, is really difficult. It's a very heavy lift. But if you can do some things to, in fact, even if you just took this list and had that discussion with your CEO or your CHRO, or whoever is asking for the program or that you report to, and go through these things and say, in order for us to achieve the change, I'm going to need some time. I'm going to need this much money. I'm going to need whatever it is, because we do this as a living, but lots of times the C-suite don't realize what goes into a program like this. So I think the better you can educate them And the more you can go through and say, these are typical barriers, can you help me with these? Because you probably can't remove them yourself. But anyway, so the change is difficult enough, so if the barriers stay in your organization, my guess is you might not see any results at all. Learning and development is difficult. So the reality is that leadership is about the team and not who's in charge, if it's done right. Leadership development is broken, but I think it can be fixed. You do little tweaks at a time. You probably can't get it all done in one day. But I think if you're going to begin with the end in mind, you have to remember that it's about building a person who can build an effective and work with the team and make them effective. It's not just about that individual. And you need to use assessments that focus on behavior rather than bigger competencies, big buckets that are a little elusive. And then also keep in mind, of course, that one leadership does not fit, or one leadership development program does not fit all of your leaders. And I think if you're going to fix some of these things, you're going to have to be brave enough to break some things. So I think you break away from that traditional definition of leadership. If you want effective leaders, they need to be building teams and making the teams that they work with more effective and better. You're going to have, I think, the bias that are in selection processes, especially if you've got a nominating process within your organization, you're going to have to break away from that. And once again, I've said this a couple times, but make sure that you're measuring the performance of the team. Are they actually able to make the team better? Once again, it's a heavy lift too. Break free from the compensating models and move to behaviors, to develop behaviors. Use the assessments where you can, behavior-based assessments where you can get specific behaviors to focus on. And then, of course, work on the barriers that get in the way and interfere with the development. And I think we're supposed to wait on Q&A, aren't we? So anyway, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Wendy. You know, listening to this presentation, well, the first time I knew you're explaining this, I remember when Bob came 3 years ago. In his presentation, he gave a result of a research survey that 65% of management are incompetent. So imagine the shock, right, to leaders and people in general when they hear this kind of somber idea, right, that leadership, managers are incompetent in the great majority. And he had a lot of reasons why this was being said. With your presentation, I see it still broken, right? So even though, you know, we have all this information, we struggle, we all here, we struggle in convincing, in implementing the leadership development that really work and make a difference to the life of the people working for these leaders.
Well,
I asked you to...
You have to continue, though, no matter how hard it is.
Yes,
to fight the good fight, is what I say.
Exactly. Fight the good fight, yes. And I asked you to stay here because I'd like to introduce our next next guest. You had something for me, no? Okay.
Are the most consequential and dangerous forces on Earth. Well, personality psychology is about the nature of human nature. It's about people. And wouldn't that be useful to know? It seems to me, I can't think of a more important problem.
Este é o início de todos os podcasts que quem não assistiu, quem não ouviu nenhum ainda, eu recomendo que assistam, né? Que já está no número 89, né, capítulos, episódios, e todo início do podcast tem esta fala do Dr. Hogan, falando sobre a importância de trabalharmos com pessoas, né? E sobre pessoas, sobre valores das pessoas, valores das organizações, é com muita gratidão que eu convido aqui o Dr. Hogan para nos apresentar a importância de valores para a eficácia organizacional. E agora nós vamos sentar.
Okay.
Now we're gonna... Oops, let's go there. That way.